Stories were told that in at Bethlehem on the first Christmas and was roaming the earth on a special mission for the baby Jesus. This story begins the Christmas season of any year, when the deer's wanderings took him into a great forest near the home of an old woodcutter, which was set rather far from the village. Few persons ever saw Nicholas, the woodcutter, except from a distance, and as about anyone who is not understood. Stories were told about him. The villagers even came to call him Old Nick, which fit very well with his shaggy gray beard that each year grew longer and whiter. The truth was, this man was lonely and unhappy. He had not felt needed by anyone since his little grandson had died many years before. He had grown used to his loneliness as he sealed himself off from mankind. Here in his workshop, he looked even more like Old Nick with his great mane of hair. But actually, this old man had been a woodcarver. He had carved the figures that lined the walls. He had made them for his grandson, but he had not done any carving since his grandson's death. The figures were but his memories that made time stand still. He even had carved figures to tell the Christmas story, but his grandson had died before he carved one of the baby Jesus. With that one exception, he had all of the figures of the Nativity, even the figure of a deer. For in this region, the story of the Christmas deer had been told many times, and even been written as a song. A Christmas song whose melody Nick liked to play on a whistle he once carved. On that Christmas night came the deer a-wandering to the manger where Mary sat a-watching, and the shepherds there at the babe were wondering, and the wise men kneeled, praying to Lord Jesus. On that holy night came the Christmas deer. Yes, this was Nicholas and his hermit's world, a lonely remnant of time for a man who no longer felt needed. It was a few days later. Old Nick was on his way back from the forest with an old sled of his grandson's loaded with as much wood as he could pull. As he came to a bend in the roadway, he saw the deer watching him. From this first moment, Nick seemed drawn to the animal. He left his wood without a backward glance, and thus began a strange journey. Standing quietly until the old man was near, the deer then moved slowly and deliberately, as if setting his pace for Old Nick to follow. Only when Nick was deep in the forest did the deer bound out of sight, leaving just his tracks.
Bright and cold the sun, and the wind was bitter. Still he followed on through the snows of winter, the way the trail shows to a little boy. The tracks led to a boy. They led right up to him, and Nick, following them, came upon the child. The boy, too, had followed a deer, but when the deer had run off, he was lost. Did Nick know the way back? So Nick was needed, if only to lead the boy out of the forest. The effect of being needed by a boy was very strong on Old Nick. Or was it the effect of the nearness of the Christmas deer? Whatever the cause,
Wonders are sometimes worked in the souls of men, and this happened to Nick. By the time they approached the roadway, Nick didn't want the boy to leave. Trying to think of something to interest the child, the old man talked of how he carved things out of wood, all sorts of things, even whistles on which he could play tunes. Putting his whistle to his lips, he watched the boy as he played. The whistle spoke of the old man's need. Through the nearby trees, the song spoke to the doves. It whispered to the fowl of the barnyards near. It even spoke to the courtyard birds with their feathers long. To the donkey, too, spoke the ancient song, and to the Christmas deer. Then, could it whisper to a child's heart? The boy seemed charmed by the melody, and on a sudden impulse, the old man took a stick. "You could make one out of this," he suggested, offering it to the child. With a word of thanks to the old man, the boy ran toward the village, clutching the crude gift, taking more than the old man meant to give, and leaving Nick feeling disturbed and uncertain. In his workshop, he sat fingering the figures of the nativity scene. The place where the baby Jesus figure should be seemed big and vacant. And for the first time in years, Nick started to carve once more. He would make a figure of the baby Jesus. He selected a piece of wood and began his work. He knew just what the figure should look like. But his fingers were clumsy. The knife slipped and the work was hard. As he worked, the piece of wood that should have looked more and more like a Christ child actually looked more and more like another whistle. His talent for carving, so long neglected, seemed gone. Now the awful feeling of uselessness mingled with his loneliness, and aimlessly he moved to look out the little window of his world. But even the figure of the deer on the hillside did not awaken old Nick's spirit. The day before Christmas, Nick was dejectedly pulling his wood home from the forest when the boy came running after him, calling. Like a guardian angel stood the deer nearby. The boy told an amazing story. He had made a whistle and then taken it to the village church. There, beside the church, was a nativity scene with a Christ child. To him, the boy took the whistle in thanks for having been rescued from the forest. Then he remembered words so clearly he thought someone spoke to him. If you would give to him, take your gift. Secretly give it to a poor child to remind him of Christmas. So that is what the boy had done. He had taken the whistle to give it secretly. But there were many poor children, and he had only one gift. The story meant more to old Nick than to the boy. With only a word to the child, he started home, leaving the boy thinking he must have offended the old man and wondering why. But this was because he did not know the gift he had given old Nick. The Christmas deer knew. In his workshop, Nick surveyed the figures he had carved long ago. They no longer looked worthless. Into a great bag he began placing them. The figures of the children, those of the animals, and all of the others. One by one he took them from their resting places. He did not stop until the shelves were bare. Only the clock was not in the big bulging bag. Only the clock and the Christmas scene remained. The Christmas scene without a baby Jesus. Putting on his heaviest coat, the old man took the bag and left. What happened then We can only guess from stories of the strange sky that night, with its oddly bright stars casting an almost mystic glow over the landscape. Many villagers told of seeing a deer pulling a sleigh, while a man in a red coat took presents to each door. Through the years, the stories grew to one of a loaded sleigh pulled by many deer, led by a particularly magnificent deer. But it is hard to be sure what people did see in the starlight, though it is easy to believe what must have happened. For when the old man returned to his workshop, the great bag was empty. Yet he no longer felt alone as he knelt before the Christmas scene to pray he could make even better gifts for more children before the next Christmas season came. He raised his eyes. Among his figures of Christmas was the figure of a baby Jesus. It seemed to fill the room and to promise Nick's prayer would be answered. And that is the story of the Christmas deer, for those who can believe more than what they see.